What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Baseball Podcast, and today we are having a bit of a therapy session. That's right, we're going to talk about some regrets that we have through the first half of the season, specifically draft day regrets, players that we took that we probably shouldn't have taken in hindsight. And I got a great guest here to help us out. It is Chris Towers from CBS Fantasy Baseball Today. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It might be a little bit of a sad topic, but I know we are going to have some fun.
Yeah, I'm not. Look, we all have regrets in life. You can't dwell on them. You learn from them, and that's what we're hoping to do. We're hoping to learn from some of the mistakes that we made, and hopefully come out the other side better than we were coming in.
That's the whole point here. We are trying to make you better fantasy players. So subscribe to the podcast if you guys haven't done so already on the YouTube channel, on the podcast feed. Like the video, do all that great stuff. Help us grow the channel. But we are going to get into it today talking about some of our draft day regrets. And I'm going to start right at the top here. This will be more some free-flowing conversations today. But we're going to start with some first-round players that really did not live up to their draft price. And it's not injury-related. It's simply performance-related. Gunnar Henderson, Kyle Tucker, Fernando Tatis, and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Now, there were some drafts where these guys went in the second round, but top 50 and top 20 picks by and large that have all really, really disappointed. If you're looking at dollar values on the Fangraphs auction calculator or the Fangraphs player rater, Gunnar Henderson has been a $12 player. Tucker has been an $8.50 player. Fernando Tatis, $12.80. And Vladimir Guerrero Jr., just short of a $5 valuation to this point of the season. So, Chris, take it individually, take these as a group if you'd like. Was the process sound for these guys to be first round picks? Because I can tell myself a story about all of them that we shouldn't have taken them in the first round. Gunnar Henderson, coming off of the last couple of years, maybe not quite as good as his peak, which I believe was 2022 when he had the 37 homers. Things have been slowly trending downwards. Kyle Tucker with the injury concerns, first year of a big contract. Tatis with the PEDs and the injuries, and Vladdy, who also has kind of just not really lived up to the hype over the last couple of years. Was the process sound for these guys to be cornerstones of our teams, or was this a mistake that we should have seen coming?
I think Vlad is the most obvious mistake, and I think this is one where the process was not great, because if not for the big postseason that he has, I think he's probably more like a second or third round pick. And then he has this massive playoff run where they go to the World Series. They almost win it. He hit, 9 home runs in the postseason, something like that?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, okay, great. Vlad's figured it out. And it's like, well, no, we've seen this guy for a pretty long time. We've seen a couple of really huge seasons. But for the most part, he's been like the 40th best player in fantasy. And he is still only 27 years old, and he has these stretches, these flashes, and we know the physical ability for him to be a huge power hitter who also helps you a lot in batting average. We know that's there. I mean, we saw it obviously famously in 2021, but even 2024, he hit 30 homers, hit 323. He was incredible. But I think too many people, when it comes to Vlad Jr., convince themselves of the positive side of the story only. And I think the thing that you like about him in a long-term context is the floor is pretty high. Like even this season, which has been pretty terrible, the worst of his career so far, I would say. Yeah. He's hitting 277. He has a 360 on base percentage. He's on pace for about 90 runs. Like this is still a useful player. Heck, he's on pace for like 12 stolen bases.
Yeah.
This is still a useful player. It is not dragging your lineup down to have Vladimir Guerrero in there in the way. I'm sure there's someone I could think of who's an actual drag, like a Salvador Perez this season. You are actively hurting your team by having Salvador Perez in your lineup right now. That is not the case with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. So in that instance, it's hard to have too many regrets, but I do think there has been too much of a focus on the rare times when it all goes right for Vlad. And look, I think we're going to see a stretch like that at some point. And, there's going to be some 10 homers in 35 game stretch coming up for Vladimir Guerrero where the numbers start to normalize. And I think he'll end up with around 20 to 25 homers and close to 90 RBI. I know the pace is real off there, but he probably picks up the pace there. And it'll look better, and he'll probably be a $20 player by the end of the season. But I think there's too much of a looking at the good and ignoring not even the bad, but just the times when he's not hitting for power, because it's really what it comes down to. The contact is still there. He hits the ball hard. He just doesn't elevate the ball consistently. And obviously that's been the problem for Fernando Tatis this season as well. And that's kind of been the problem for him in recent years. But this is one where I've seen people say, well, we should have seen this coming, but I don't really think that's the case. Yes, he has had trouble elevating the ball to the pull side in the past. Yes, he has had trouble living up to the really, really impressive underlying numbers. He had 25 homers last season. He had 21 in 102 games in 2024. The 3 homers in 78 games, there is no reason anybody should have seen this coming for Fernando Tatis. And since he hit that first homer, I think it was like in late May, he finally hit his first homer on May 30th. He's basically hit like you expect Fernando Tatis to, more or less. Obviously, it's 3 homers in 25 games or whatever. We hope for more than that. But month of June, 326 batting average, 5 stolen bases, 10 extra base hits, 14 runs, 10 RBI. That's pretty close to what you were hoping for from Fernando Tatis. It's not first round worthy, but that one I think is mostly just he kind of screwed up his swing. And he changed his batting stance in late May, opened it back up, and he's more or less looked like himself since then. So I think Tatis definitely will be okay. Guerrero's the one that I think just maybe there was a bad process. Maybe there was just some ignoring when things go wrong. Now, Gunnar Henderson, I can't really figure out because he had that 2024 season where he hit 37 homers, 210 combined runs and RBI, 21 steals. He was just an incredible all-around performance. But you look into it and 2024, let me make sure I have the numbers right. Yeah. 28 homers in 95 games in the first half, 9 in 64 games in the second half. Then it's 17 homers last season. It was 28 in 2023. He's up to 16 now. I think he's probably a 25 to 30 homer guy. But I think that first half of 2024 may have tricked us into thinking, remember, he was like neck and neck with Aaron Judge in the first half of that season and looked like a top 5 overall player. And I do think that's one that maybe he's more like a top 20 hitter in fantasy. And he hasn't been quite that good this season. I think that's largely just the 259 BABIP. And once that normalizes, he's going to be on a 30 homer pace, and the steals are a little disappointing, but I think he'll get to 15 plus, and it's going to be a really good player. It's just maybe not an elite hitter. Maybe it's just he had the one stretch where he was an elite hitter.
Yeah, it's been kind of a frustrating trajectory for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, if memory serves, he was hurt like the last week of draft season.
Yeah,
somewhere in that range.
It's an oblique or a lat or intercostal. I think it was an intercostal strain.
And he played pretty much the entirety of the season still, 154 games. And I kind of talked myself into thinking, okay, he was playing hurt the whole year. He was trying to just, the Orioles were not a great team, trying to will them to the postseason or what have you. But it was, in my estimation, he was playing hurt. But this season, it's kind of the same. It's an 8.5% barrel rate when in those 23 and 24 seasons, it was 11.4, 11.2. The hard hit rate was 52 and 54. Still very good, but 49 and 45, they are not the same numbers that they were. So I agree. I think we might have been tricked a little bit. He also chases more than he used to. I think we might have been fooled a little bit by Gunnar Henderson. And going back to Vladdy, I don't think and honestly, even Tatis as well, they're so easy to wish cast on because of how amazing they were early in their careers. And with Vladdy, also the Hall of Fame father and the top prospect and everything. It's so easy to look at these guys.
The skill sets for both, like they're ludicrously talented for sure.
But with Vladdy, it's as the farther and farther away we get from those 48 homers, I'll still see the occasional post on Twitter that says there's going to be a year where Vladdy eventually gets back and he hits 50 homers and he hits 320 and he's the MVP. And for a couple of years there, I was kind of thinking, yeah, he's going to eventually do it. He's going to win an MVP. He's going to hit 325. Like he's going to have one of those massive 180 WRC plus type of seasons. And I don't think that's coming without some drastic changes to his swing. The ground balls, the barrel rate being cut in half, something is off this
Mhm.
year. The average exit velocities have always been in the 92 range and above, 92.5, 95, 93, 92. He's at 89 this year. So there's something wrong with Vlad. He
Yeah.
has been banged up a little bit. There's been a couple of games that he's missed with little injuries here and there. But this feels like he needs a full reset, whether it's drive line, whether it's a new hitting coach. Something needs to change with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. before I even consider taking him inside the top 3 or 4 rounds. If you're drafting for today, next season, is Vladdy somewhere in the 3rd round, somewhere in the 4th round, maybe? Does that
I
sound
would
about
think
right?
third. I think you've got like, I was a little skeptical of Nick Kurtz coming into the season, and that
Oh,
looks really dumb.
me too. Me too.
Because this guy might just be like an Aaron Judge level hitting talent. And
Yeah.
I didn't think he was quite that good. I think he is clearly far and away the number one first baseman. He's probably a first rounder next year. If we're redrafting today, I think you'd have to take him in the first round.
Yeah.
After that, it's a glut of first basemen with Bryce Harper, Matt Olson, who has slowed down a little bit, but is still having an awesome season. I think Vlad's in there. Pete Alonso is in there. I think those guys, you would see a lot of first basemen, like one in the first round, none in the second, and then you'd start to see some in the third, but maybe like later third, because there's also, Vlad is, I guess, the youngest of that second group, but it's a pretty old group. Like Vlad's 27, 28, Harper's 33, Olson's in his 30s. Freddie Freeman is up there, although he's probably a little below that. I guess Ben Rice is probably the 2nd-round guy right now if he keeps this up. I guess I keep thinking about him as a
catcher,
but he's not going to be a catcher next season. He's going to be first base only, and I don't think you can put him in the first round yet. I mean, if he does this for a full season, we'll see. But we have a bigger sample size of Nick Kurtz playing at that level. But yeah, Matt Olson. Yandy Diaz might belong in the 4th, but he's also pretty old. So and Yandy Diaz is never going to actually get drafted that high because everybody's like he's kind of Vlad Guerrero.
He is. He is. Honestly, I did this maybe like a month ago, looking back since 2022 to the present date, and they're both like a 140 WRC plus, 850, 860 OPS. Vlad has more homers, but essentially it's the 20, 25 homers, 290 batting average. It's the same guy. Yandy gets undervalued every single season. Go ahead, guys. Go ahead.
What Vlad's starting to make me think is like Bryce Harper, where we have seen 2, maybe 3 huge seasons from Bryce Harper. We've seen the 1 year that he won 1109 OPS, 1 year he had 1008, another he had 1044. Other than that, it's mostly been high 800s OPSs. And then the peak seasons are really, really good. And that might just be what Vlad is. Because you look at the trajectory for Vlad and for Bryce Harper. Harper was good. He was good for a very young player. But it took until about his age 23 season to have that huge season. Then he had a disappointing season. And then it's a couple more disappointing seasons. And it's another big one, 2021. He's probably 29 that year. And then since then, it's been a lot of good, but not elite seasons. And that just might be what Vladimir Guerrero is, where he's a really high floor player. He's really good. You're going to get something out of him. And then the really high-end outcomes are a top 5 player. And maybe that's more what Vlad can be, because he's kind of done that twice. I think 2024, I don't know. He was probably a top 10 hitter, maybe top 5.
Yeah, he hit 323, 30 homers.
Yeah,
I think he was. Yeah, that was honestly, like if you look at WRC plus and OPS, like he was just about as good in 2024 as he was during 2021 without the massive homer output.
Yeah.
166 WRC plus to 164, 1,000 OPS to 940. That was the closest we've seen. And again, it kills me because we know that this is there. There is a Hall of Fame player inside of Vladdy. And I hope that they are able to unlock it. And the funny thing is, again, I said this is a therapy session, so why not? If Jeff Hoffman can pitch that slider just a little bit lower in the zone to Miguel Rojas, nobody cares because Vladdy has a World Series MVP, and then he's given a bit of a longer leash this season. From a fantasy perspective, we'd still be mad, but the pitchforks would not be out in Toronto the way they are for Vladdy for sure. So thank you, Jeff Hoffman.
We should also mention Kyle Tucker.
Yes.
Who I actually genuinely think there was no way to see this coming. Like, he was not as good in 2025 as he had been in previous years. He's 28 years old. That's right around when you can start to see some decline, but he was another guy who was clearly playing through an injury. He had that fractured hand that he played through for months last year. And so I thought that was the explanation for why Kyle Tucker was so bad last season, or at least in the second half. Before that, I mean, we were talking about a guy who has been a consistent 140 WRC plus, 285, 290 hitter, 20 homers, 30 homers, 25 steals every year. And now he's in the Dodgers lineup. This should be the best possible landing spot. No pressure. You're the fourth best hitter or the fourth most important player. And he's been terrible. And the underlying numbers mostly back it up. There's just been this huge decline across the board. I don't know if, the time he's missed with injuries the last couple of seasons, both of which seemed fluky.
Yeah.
They were both misdiagnosed injuries. It didn't seem like something that should linger, but he's just been a shell of himself this season in a way that I still have a lot of faith that he's going to figure it out, but I wish there was something I could grab onto besides, hey, didn't you used to be Kyle Tucker,
Yeah, and there's a common tenet in fantasy baseball to fade the first year of the big contract, and I wonder if that is the easiest explanation, that guys, when they're playing for the contract, is a little bit extra oomph. And maybe that's not the case last year because he was hurt and everything, but you get the contract, your foot comes off the gas ever so slightly. I'm not even saying he's not trying, but maybe there's something just internally where you have the big deal, you know that you're not playing for another big contract. I mean, he has a couple opt-outs, I think, but he's making $57 million a year for the next 4 years. He's probably pretty happy with that. And I don't want to read too much into it, but a lot of people do fade the guy in the first year of the big contract. We saw it with Lindor. We saw it with Trey Turner. Sometimes these guys struggle when they first sign those big deals. And maybe that's what it is with Tucker. I'll mention later, but he's probably my biggest regret because I was hammering him at the end of the first round. He was a second round pick before he signed, and he jumped up once he did sign, understandably so. And the Dodgers lineup has still protected him a little bit with 44 runs, 40 RBI, but 6 homers and 6 steals. It's been miserable for Kyle Tucker to this point, but I do think he will probably turn it around. Even in this horrible year, it's still a 100 WRC plus. He's still on the right side of 30. So cautiously optimistic that Kyle Tucker will turn things around. Let's talk about some of the consensus fades. And I was, chiefly among these guys being faded. Yordan Alvarez, Byron Buxton, O'Neill Cruz, Pete Crow-Armstrong, and James Wood to a lesser extent because they were still third, fourth round picks. But guys that a lot of the fantasy community, a lot of smart people were just crossing off their draft boards. It looks like a huge mistake because the guys I just mentioned make up the majority of the top of the first round of the player rater to this point of the season. Yordan Alvarez is a $39 player, 37 for James Wood, 32 for PCA. Byron Buxton at $30 value. O'Neill Cruz has been hurt, and so he's missed some time, but still a $27 value. So my question, Chris, and I say this as we are quote unquote touts and people that are, creating the content. Is it time that we maybe start thinking about fading some of the content sometimes? And I mean that to say, when we see that 6 different people are making videos about fading a specific player, should we maybe consider zigging more and people are zagging more than we have in previous years? Because I know that I can get caught up in that group thing sometimes. Eno will say something, and then you and Frank and Scott will say something, and then Pisa Pia will say it, and then in my mind, it's fact. Is there something to be said for going against the grain, more so than people do?
I think it depends on why you're going against the grain. I think if you're just going against the grain, because you can also say, well, everybody was in on Ben Rice, and that's worked out brilliantly.
That's true.
And everyone was in on Chase Burns, and that's worked out brilliantly. I think it depends on, I don't think it should be contrarianisms for contrarianism's sake, right? It should be, I don't like the price. And so if you reach a point, and unfortunately, this is what I did with Ben Rice. He got pushed up into the 45 range in drafts. And I was like, whoa, that's a little too much. And clearly it wasn't. Clearly that was the right place to take him. And if we had known he was going to be this good, frankly, he should have gone 25 picks higher than that, maybe more. So,
Yeah.
I think it ultimately comes down to not just being opposed to players because they're popular, but just does the skill set justify the price? And I think in some of these cases, like Yordan Alvarez that's probably my biggest win of the year so far, because I was all in on him. I like the thing with Yordan Alvarez, and it's been true. It's something I've said about Byron Buxton in the past, although I think for Yordan Alvarez, the case was even clearer. When the only thing that needs to go right for a player is they stay healthy, that's not a lot of variables.
It's true. Yeah.
And with Yordan Alvarez, the skill set for him as a hitter is so clearly elite. Like, just in terms of what he does at the plate, I think it's Aaron Judge and I think it's Yordan Alvarez. I do not think there's a better hitter besides Aaron Judge in baseball than Yordan Alvarez. And I'm including Shohei Ohtani in that. As great as he is, I think Yordan Alvarez purely as a hitter is better. And he just needs to stay healthy. He's a first-round caliber player if he plays 140 games, because you're going to get a great batting average. You're going to get a ton of power. He is one of, I think, 2 or 3 players in the entire league who is capable of hitting 300 and hitting 50 homers. And I was saying this before the season. And look at that. He's on pace for 50 homers, and he's hitting 322 this season. Now, look, he could still get hurt, and the doubters could end up right. Like, he might only play 81 games. That's what he's played currently. If he plays 140 games, I mean, honestly, when we were getting him in like the 3rd round of 15-team leagues occasionally, like I saw him drop to like 40th at times. And if he doesn't play another game, it was still a great pick. Because you've already banked 25 homers, 57 runs, 56 RBI, and a 322 batting average. If you replace him with Lourdes Gurriel the rest of the season, that's worth a top 45 pick. Like that's just, I don't care. So that's one thing when it comes to these injury guys is, I guess the narrative is a little different in the high stakes leagues where there are no IL spots and you're playing 15-team leagues, and the replacement level might just be Lourdes Gurriel and nothing better.
Yeah.
That makes it a little harder to justify, but like your standard home league, the way 90% of people who play fantasy baseball play, you have IL spots. You're playing in a 12-team league usually.
Yeah.
The replacement level outfielder in that league is going to be someone with a pulse. And so you don't just take a 0. And that's what I think a lot of people forget with Byron Buxton, with Yordan Alvarez, with these guys is, they're injury risk. Well, one, everybody has some injury risk. Aaron Judge has missed a bunch of time. Francisco Lindor has had 2 separate long IL stints after being super consistently healthy. Jose Ramirez is on the IL. Injuries can happen to everyone. Yordan Alvarez and Byron Buxton clearly have more injury risk, but those guys, you just need one thing to go right for them. This is not like betting on Pete Crow-Armstrong, where there's going to be inherent injury risk for him just because the way he plays. I think he's just like, he hasn't gotten hurt, but he plays a kind of wild way that I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some injuries. But that's just baseline level injury risk. But with Pete Crow-Armstrong, it's like, we saw it for a month and a half. He was a pretty terrible hitter for a month and a half. You needed multiple things to go right for Pete Crow-Armstrong. So I was fading him. I ended up with nothing in Pete Crow-Armstrong. I did end up with James Wood in a couple places. Honestly, I thought James Wood was just as risky as Pete Crow-Armstrong. So I can't even take a victory lap on having him, because I was very worried, and it just happened that he dropped enough that I was willing to take the flyer. But I mean, he had a 40% strikeout rate in the second half last season.
Doing a draft with Mason and Spore, I mentioned this on the show recently, where James Wood was sitting there in like the 4th or 5th round, and it was like playing chicken, and eventually Mason ended up taking him. We're like, oh, what a sucker. He took James Wood. Yeah, not quite. Not exactly. But to go back to Yordan for a second, just the historic greatness of how he has played in his career to this point. When you look at left-handed hitters all time, going back to 1871 to now, he is the eighth highest WRC plus ever for a qualified left-handed hitter. And a couple of them are guys who we've never heard of, who played 500 or so games, who were born in the 1800s. Here are the 4 players ahead of him who have played substantial full major league careers that have a higher left-handed WRC plus than Yordan Alvarez. It's Babe Ruth, it's Ted Williams, it's Barry Bonds, and it's Lou Gehrig. That's insane.
Basically the 5 best hitters ever.
That's literally insane that
Like
he's that good.
Here's the entire list of hitters with a better WRC plus than Yordan Alvarez since his debut. Aaron Judge.
Yeah.
That's the whole list. He's been better than Juan Soto since 2019. He's been better than Shohei Ohtani, Mike Trout, Freddie Freeman, Ronald Acuna, Bryce, like everyone. He is just an absurdly talented hitter. He makes a ton of contact. He hits the ball incredibly hard. I think people just, I don't know, kind of forgot how good Yordan Alvarez is.
Yeah, I did. I know I did for sure. With all the injuries and just, and on top of the injuries,
he was not good last year.
There's that too. Like he was, relatively fine for most players, 118 WRC plus, but like compared to what he usually is, totally. But when you look at his injuries, and then you also factor in that the Astros have bungled damn near every injury that they've had over the last couple of years, there was no real reason to have the faith in him. But as a 4th round pick, like you said, all that needed to stay right for him, for Buxton, was just to stay healthy. And I think that that's something I need to reconsider going forward. Guys who do have the injury risk but are extremely talented maybe need to be in higher consideration. And the other player type that I think I ruled out a little bit too quickly was the PCA and the James Wood, the guys who are really, really talented, raw skill-wise, and they're still 23, 24 years old. And I'd crossed them off of my draft board. Why? Because they had a really bad second half. But that's something I need to reevaluate. Was it worthy of fading these guys into oblivion the way that I did? It was understandable, I think. A lot of people shared the same opinions, but I didn't factor in the potential growth for a guy in PCA who went 30-30 as a 23-year-old who has guaranteed playing time with his defense. And James Wood, part of it as well, is the Nationals have been so great. The most runs scored in all of baseball is the Nationals somehow. But I think just factoring in things that you're ruling out in your evaluation process, don't ever fully rule out anything. Pete Crow-Armstrong's not going to have a high on base percentage. He chases too much, blah, blah. He has a 366 on base rate. He's walked more this season than he did all of last year. So I think part of it for me is just the progression. Don't rule out players who are 23 years old from getting better. We're going to keep it going in a second. Go ahead.
I just want to add 2 things. One, the thing I didn't think about with the Nationals was just how poorly run they had been the past few years and how just getting someone who understands baseball in 2026 running that team clearly has made a huge difference for that whole organization. And 2, the one thing I always try to tell myself, and I forgot this time, is the second half actually doesn't matter that much. We have a tendency to think that like the second half has more predictive value. Like a really good second half will lead to a really good following season, or a really bad. And that actually doesn't track. Like if you look it up, the second half of the season actually has slightly less of a correlation with what a player will do the following year than the first half. But basically there's no real correlation. Like you are almost always better off taking what they did for the full season to predict what they will do moving forward. And in both James Wood and PCA's cases, they were worth top 30 picks just based on what they did overall. And I think I focused a little too much on, did they get exposed? And it's like, well, no, maybe they just happened to have their worst 2 months at the back end of the season. And that doesn't actually matter very much.
It's true. It's arbitrary endpoints that we put a lot of stock into. When does the first half split and the second half split go over? It usually isn't even the 50% mark of the season. It's after. I think it's around the All-Star break they split it up. So I think I agree. We put too much stock sometimes into things that maybe don't matter so much. It's not to say we ignore it. If a guy, drastically changes his swing or he adds a pitch in the second half and has success with it, you pay attention. But just looking, he was bad in the second half, therefore I'm fading him, is bad process. Guys, we're going to keep it going in a second, but first I want to remind you about My Playbook. With My Playbook, you'll instantly identify the best pickups available in your league, win every trade with our trade analyzer, and see the most optimal lineup every day based on our projections and your specific scoring settings. Sync your league at fantasypros.com/MLB My Playbook, or download the Fantasy Pros app for personalized expert advice. You can also unlock every premium Fantasy Pros tool for 3 full days for free. Who doesn't like free? At fantasypros.com/free. Let's talk some pitching, Chris. And this is a player type I wanted to discuss as well. The kind of unproven starting pitcher who does get some helium throughout the winter, specifically in March, that ends up falling flat on their face. And we've seen a couple examples this year. Now, Kyle Bradish has turned things around, but if you drafted him as your ace, it's going to take quite a bit of turnaround for that whip to come down, still in the 140 range. Emmet Sheehan has not been good. really at all. The velocity coming into the season was looking like a bit of a red flag, and it turns out it was. And Eury Perez, who's dealt with injuries and also inconsistencies. So this was, and there's also other names that I could mention in this group as well. Jesus Luzardo, to some extent, a guy who doesn't
Nolan
have
McLean.
Nolan McLean, who looked great to start the year, and now he's kind of fallen off a cliff a little bit. How much stock did you put into the kind of unproven March starting pitchers? Because I personally did. I put a lot of stock into Bradish and Sheehan and Eury Perez, and it really has not worked out. So was the process bad to trust these guys, or are we simply just running into some bad luck with their individual seasons?
I think it's again about the price, and it's about what goes into the price. When Kyle Bradish starts rising in the rankings from, when we're doing drafts in November, those of us who are sickos who are doing that, and then when everybody's drafting in March, when guys are rising in that time frame, I think the biggest thing you have to ask yourself is why. Kyle Bradish didn't have an especially, I don't remember, but I don't think he pitched especially well in December. Right? There was no concrete reason why Kyle Bradish should be more expensive in March than he was in November. And that's the case with a lot of these guys, where what happens is not, we have concrete reasons to like this guy more now than we did 3 months ago.
Yeah.
It is, oh, well, I saw this guy drafted him early, so now I got to push him on. And it's an arms race, right? If I think I can get him at 50, I'll wait until 50. But if it's, well, he went 48 in a previous draft, so now I got to take him 47. Well, the next draft he's got to go 45, and that ends up, and sometimes it ends up working out. Ben Rice is a really good example of how that worked out. But you generally should have real reasons to like a player more than you did before. And so I think, I've done a little bit of research in this. This was a couple years ago, but I have found that the guys who rise during spring training the most, outside of prospects, because there are tangible reasons for that, the guys whose price rises late in draft process tend to be worse bets than the guys in the range they end up in, because you're not looking at some tangible reason usually for them to go up. Sometimes you have velocity readings and sometimes you have playing time things, but when we're talking about Kyle Bradish, known quantity, there were always reasons to like him. And look, I had him as a top 15 starting pitcher coming into the season, so I'm not absolving myself of this. But moving those guys up, absent a really good reason, it is always risky, because you're not basing it on a tangible thing. You're basing it on the market and the way other people are reacting. And that can work out, but it's not a great way to approach it from a player analysis standpoint. That being said, Bradish is the one I'm the most confident in, just because, one, it helps that he has 19 strikeouts in his last 2 starts. So, if we had this conversation 8 days ago, I might have a different tune.
Yes.
But seeing him do that and seeing him have that slider back the last couple of starts and look really good, it's also, Kyle Bradish, since his breakout in 2023, I believe, has always been good. There has not been a time when Kyle Bradish has been on the mound since his breakout in 2023 where he has not been at least a very good pitcher. And so I'm just going to buy in that track record matters. Eury Perez, I think he's going to be awesome eventually. You debut at 20 and you're that good, you're going to be great. It's very rare to debut as young as he did and hold your own, let alone be very good, and not eventually be a Cy Young contender. Sheehan, this is one I have tried to work into my mental model the last few years, picking up on hints that the team that the guy is on doesn't like them as much as we do, and trying to figure out why that is. Because, look, I hope everyone in your audience will agree, even the people who like me, will agree that the people running the Dodgers are smarter than I am. And certainly they know the players on the Dodgers more than I do. And the Dodgers have been weirdly not as bought into Emmet Sheehan as we have. Like, the fantasy community, we look at Emmet Sheehan and we're like, this guy's one of the 10 best pitchers in baseball, clearly. Like, the whiff rate it's like him and Jacob deGrom. And we look at him and we think, oh, this guy's an ace. And then you look at how the Dodgers have approached him. And last year, when it came time to skip starts down the stretch, it was almost always Emmet Sheehan. Or when it came time to move guys into the bullpen, it was Emmet Sheehan. In the postseason, it was Emmet Sheehan moving to the bullpen where he did not pitch well. This spring, if you looked at the quotes, it was, we know our rotation when healthy is Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, Shohei Ohtani. They were throwing Roki Sasaki in there, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And Sheehan would always be either the sixth guy or just not mentioned. And that didn't mean he was not in the rotation, but I think he is not viewed as quite as key to this team as the rest of those guys are. And yet we were drafting him as a top 30 starting pitcher, at least. And so that's one where I see the same things everyone else does on his Baseball Savant page and everything. And I see that there are things to like about Emmet Sheehan. And then I see the Dodgers just being a little standoffish with him. And it's like, okay, there's something here that I'm kind of pumping my brakes on. I think I had him in did I have him in my bus column? I'm trying to see. I might have. I'm not sure if I ended up putting him in there, but he was someone that I ended up not drafting at price, and I'm pretty happy about that.
I drafted him everywhere, and honestly, that's one of those things. Reading the tea leaves better than I typically do. I pay a little bit of attention when teams say things a lot of the time, but also a lot of the time I feel like the team will say something. Oh, the guy's he's going to be fine. He's not going on the IL. And then the next day he goes on the IL. So it's parsing through the BS essentially and figuring out what is fact and what is fiction. And you laid it out perfectly. They demonstrated at multiple points last year that they were not huge fans of Emmet Sheehan. His velocity was down in the spring. This should have been a guy that I just wasn't paying attention to. And yet even still, when I look at him, I see a guy who has a 20% strikeout to walk rate or 19.3%. And anywhere in that range, you're talking about like borderline elite pitchers. But then he's also got a 10% barrel rate allowed against. And he has a 1.86 homer per nine. And it's a very hitter-friendly ballpark. So there's so many factors. I think part of it, too, was I told myself, there's not really a huge injury risk with Sheehan. And with the rest of the staff, I could see all of them spending significant time on the IL. Sure. So he seemed like a guy where 25, 27 starts was very projectable. But again, there's just so many things that go into evaluating players. And I've kind of put things on a more of a macro level today, like talk about this group. But it really does pay to get into the weeds and find specific quotes and see what teams really, really do think of these players. We're going to talk in a second about some pitchers who were considered pretty risky heading into the season. But first, I want to remind you guys about our presenting sponsor, and that is Hard Rock Bet. They are Florida's official sports book. We do talk a lot of baseball and football here at Fantasy Pros, but it's time to talk about the other football. That's right. The world's biggest soccer tournament is here. Everyone is watching. National pride is on the line, and superstars are chasing mortality. If you haven't tried Hard Rock Bet yet, there's no better time to get in the game. Hard Rock Bet is a top-rated sportsbook app built to Viva La Copa. Whether you're backing your country, betting on your favorite superstar, or building a same-game parlay for the biggest matches of the tournament, Hard Rock Bet is your way to get in on the action. If you're ever late to the kickoff, don't worry. Hard Rock Bet lets you live bet all match long from the first minute down to the final whistle. Plus, Hard Rock Bet has new promos daily. We're talking profit boosts, no sweat bets, bonus bets, and more. Be sure to check out the No Goals, No Problem, and Super Sub, 2 promos designed to give your bets insurance all tournament long. Sign up with a Hard Rock Bet today and place a $5 bet. If it wins, you score 150 in bonus bets, a winning bet, plus an extra 150 to bet with. Now that's how you get this summer's party started. Hard Rock Bet is Florida's only legal sportsbook, but you don't have to be in Florida to join the party. Hard Rock Bet is also live in Arizona, Ohio, New Jersey, Indiana, Tennessee, Virginia, Illinois, Colorado, and Michigan. Download the Hard Rock Bet app today. Roll with us, goal with us, Hard Rock Bet. Now let's talk, Chris, about some pitchers that were kind of seen as more risky / some fades. Now, you mentioned earlier that Burns was somebody that the touts loved. I was a little bit concerned about Burns just based on the fact that he struggled a little bit down the stretch last year. I wasn't 100% sure of his role. I believe there was a flexor strain or something along those lines at the end of last year as well. You got Jacob Misiorowski, who I might, start something in the comments here, but the hardest thrower of all time. Yes, there is going to be some injury risk there, but he has been the best pitcher I've seen this year, and maybe the best pitcher I've seen since like peak DeGrom. This guy is ridiculous. Cam Schlittler, who I think it was February, there was a lat problem. He's also a guy who'd never had a whip below 120 at any level. You got Zach Wheeler, who was seen as a huge risk at his age, coming off of a kind of a surgery you don't have a ton of track record on guys coming back from. And then you got the Carlos Rodons, the Trey Savages, guys who haven't been amazing, but they've been cromulent starting pitchers, all guys who were seen as big fades coming into the year as injury risks. How do you analyze this, Chris? Is it something, again, like I mentioned before the break, that we just need to look on an individual basis, or is there something to be said for looking at guys that the market is just pushing down, this time pitchers as opposed to hitters, and saying, you know what, maybe I'm going to buy the dip on this particular class of player?
Yeah, one thing I want to mention is I talked about Emmet Sheehan and the way the Dodgers talked about him and the way the Dodgers have used him. Well, if you want to throw that back in my face, you can just say Chase Burns was not guaranteed a rotation spot this spring. They openly talked about Chase Burns not being guaranteed a rotation spot. This was not even reading between the tea leaves. This was just the words they were using, where he is in a competition for a rotation spot. And it turns out he's like, I don't know, 90% as good as Jacob Misiorowski. Like, he's incredible. He's basically like peak Spencer Strider. He's Hunter Green. Like, he's incredible. Yeah. The problem with injured players or injury risk players, and then I struggle with this when we were talking about Yordan Alvarez, because it's only healthy so far. And there's a half season left. And Chase Burns is going to throw, if he stays healthy, another 1,500 pitches at, probably 1,000 of those are going to be 98 miles an hour or above. Yeah. And so there are a lot of opportunities for that elbow to become a problem for him. But two things. One, predicting injuries is just really hard. And I think the way we generally talk about injury risk as a fantasy community, we are so smart about so many things. And we are so analytical and nuanced about so much. And then when it comes to injuries, it's just kind of black or white. It's that guy's an injury risk and this guy isn't. And take the guy who's not injury risk. And that's not actually how it works, especially for pitchers. You look at the top end of the starting pitcher list, and Tarek Skubal hadn't missed a start since he had that flexor injury in 2021. And Garrett Crochet hadn't missed a start in 2 years. And both of those guys have ended up missing significant time. And honestly, with Skubal, we got lucky that there just happened to be this new form of elbow surgery that took 6 weeks off his time, or 5 weeks off his timetable, whatever it was. But that probably should have been a 3-month absence, and it ended up being a 1.5-month absence, or a month plus. So that could have been even worse. The truth is, it's really hard to predict injuries. Every starting pitcher probably has something like a 35% chance of going on the IL in any given season. Yeah. And some guys it's 50, and some guys it's 25, but it's high for everyone. And so, you'll see like the screenshot of the velocity leaders, and then, they scratch off every player who's gotten hurt. And the problem with that, because it is true, like objectively true, that throwing at max effort is part of why players are getting hurt. The problem is, if you just don't draft guys who throw hard, your rotation's going to stink. There just aren't that many pitchers who throw 93 miles an hour and are great. I guess you could draft, I don't know, Parker Messick's been awesome, and who's good that throws like 93 miles an hour? There aren't that many of them.
Sonny Gray.
Sonny Gray, but it's been a weird season for him. And
there's not many.
But also you have like Chris Sale has stayed healthy so far. Nobody thought he could do that. Jacob deGrom has stayed healthy for a year and a half, but Max Fried went on the IL. So it's really hard to say that there's any kind of lesson when it comes to injury risk starting pitchers. Yeah. But with these guys, and especially the young guys, Misiorowski, Burns, Schlittler, they're so talented that as long as you're not paying face value for what their upside is, I think it's probably just worth taking the risk. And I think that's why Nolan McLean was the worst pick of the rookies, because you had this whole group of second-year pitchers ranging in draft costs from like the 20th-ish starting pitcher where Nolan McLean was usually going And then you had like Bubba Chandler a little lower. He was like in the
Yeah.
40th-ish range, and that clearly hasn't worked out well.
No, not at all.
But I think not picking at the top of that group was probably the best choice you could have made, because how much upside was there for Nolan McLean if you're taking him at 20? How much better can he be than that? You really have to believe that he is a nearly flawless pitcher. And he was a good prospect. Last year, I was looking it up yesterday. Last year at the midseason point, Baseball Prospectus had him as the number 34 prospect in baseball. It's a really good pitcher, really good prospect. But it was the 7 or 8 starts he made at the end of the MLB season that really rocketed him up. And he was awesome. He was really good. He showed a lot of skills, but he didn't miss as many bats as you would think for a guy with a 28%, 30% strikeout rate. It was more like a 10.5% swinging strike rate. The command or control, I guess, throughout his minor league career was not as good as it was in those 7 starts, and it's backed up a little bit here. So that was one that when you've got similar-ish players, don't take the most expensive one. And I thought that about the first base position when you had like Pete Alonso was kind of at the top of the second tier first baseman. It's like, Pete Alonso might be better than Matt Olson. It doesn't make sense to take him 15 spots ahead of Matt Olson.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my lesson from there. Is just when you have similar players with similar skill sets, similar downsides, if one is clearly more expensive, that should probably be the one you fade.
I think that's a great call. If you're tiering and tiered rankings, I think whether you're looking at somebody's or you're looking at your own, I think are really important, and something that I'm going to, transition more to. Over the years, it's mostly just been a straight ranking list for me, but having the tiers in there just so people know, all right, yeah, I'm going to take, just for your example, McLean is going, I think it was 30, 40 spots ahead of these guys that we're talking about, and they would have probably been tiered together. I think Eno in the preseason was calling them like the Fab Seven or something like that. Like all the young guys who are all in that same group, take the cheapest one, take the cheapest 2 or 3, and things will probably work out for you. Now, maybe that doesn't work out every single year. There will be variance, but these guys like Mizorowski, Burns, Schlittler, 2026 is the cheapest they will ever be, barring a year where they have to come back mid-season from something or other. Like, this is the cheapest they are ever going to be. And that type of player type, I think taking them at their floor cost is something I'm going to be looking to do a lot more as the years go by. Not every single pitcher. You can't take all of these guys. If you took all of them, then you'd also be eating the Bubba Chandler stats and the Eury Perez stats, and it would be a wash at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But a couple of them, you hit on a couple, and even if you just hit on one, even if you just hit on one Burns or a Schlittler or a Mizorowski, you're looking pretty damn good right now. Now, keeping the theme going with the younger guys, rookies have been world beaters this season. Now, things have cooled off a little bit for some of them, and there's also been some injuries in the mix, but Murakami, Eldridge, McGonigal, Pizzana, Antonacci. I didn't even throw Sal Stewart on the list here. Weatherholt, Bolte, Kristen Peters going from the Savannah Bananas to having a good baseball career, I hope is something we see more of. Rumfield, Okamoto. These are all guys that are in the 120 WRC plus and above range. You mentioned Parker Messick. McLean has cooled off a little bit, but in terms of the talent, I'm still a believer in Nolan McLean long-term. Peyton Tolley has been great. Walbert Urania, Yasavage. Gage Jump has been phenomenal. Foster Griffin coming back over, but still having the rookie qualifications. How do you think this will impact the way that people draft rookies in future seasons? Because if you comprise your team pretty much entirely of the guys that I mentioned, there's a chance you'd be like a top 3 team in your league strictly on rookies. Do you think this will impact the way that the market goes in years to come, and people might start to overvalue rookies and say, well, look at last year's class, therefore Leo DeVries, welcome to the second round. Are we going to see crazy stuff like that start to happen?
So one thing that I have 2 thoughts. One thing is it reminds me of, I think I'm going to age myself here. I think it was the 2014 wide receiver class. I want to say it was when Odell Beckham, Mike Evans, Kelvin Benjamin, like there were like 4 or 5 rookies who were like in the top 20 at wide receiver that year. And everybody the next 3 years kept overdrafting rookie wide receivers, expecting them to make an immediate impact. And the thing that you always see in the NFL is rookie wide receivers usually take some time. There will be impact rookie wide receivers every year, but it's very rare that it's week 1, Mike Evans getting 100 yards and a touchdown and then just doing it forever.
Yeah.
And in his case, literally forever.
Yeah.
It's usually like Odell Beckham that year. I think he wasn't good until like week 6. I remember because I traded him like 3 weeks in the year in a dynasty league. It was the dumbest thing I've ever done. But it usually takes a little while. Yeah. And people kept overdrafting rookie wide receivers because of that 1 year. And I think it's important not to fight the last battle. You know, like you don't want to build the Maginot line needing defensive fortifications in one, because that's what happened the last time. You know, you need to take everything at it as it comes. And especially with rookies and prospects in baseball, it's always going to be cyclical. And any year that you have an unusually large number of really good rookies, you should probably assume that the next year's probably not going to be quite as good, just because a lot of guys already graduated. And so it's not the talent level is not static every single year. Now it's possible that the rookies who come up next year are going to be just as good or better than this year's class. A lot of these guys were not. You know, Sam Antonacci was not a top 100 prospect. He was one of those guys who I think fantasy people liked quite a bit, but it required a little bit of imagination to see that. And but like from my understanding, I'm not a huge prospect guy, but I keep up with it. And my understanding is there's kind of some muddiness on the top end of the prospect rankings right now. Like, the pitcher for the Pirates who's just dominating everything.
Hernandez?
Yeah, Seth Hernandez. Like he might be the best prospect in baseball right now. And anytime the best prospect in baseball is a pitcher, I think that gives people some tummy aches, because there's so many ways for things to go wrong for pitchers. Cade Anderson might be in that discussion too.
There's no such thing as a pitching prospect.
Right, exactly. I mean, we mentioned Cam Fittler. We didn't talk much about him, but like, that is like there's no such thing as a pitching prospect the other way, where this guy was nobody a year and a half ago. Yeah. And now he's a top 10 pitcher in baseball because he added 6 miles. He added 6 miles per hour to his fastball, and all of a sudden he's incredible. Yeah. But so, things are a little shaky at the top end of the prospect rankings. We'll have, 3 more months to settle that out, and someone will go on a Connor Griffin-esque run and establish themselves as the number one guy. But, it doesn't look like next year's crop is quite as promising as this year's in terms of immediate impact. So I think if you look at it and say, well, look how good these rookies were last year, I think that might be a mistake. But I do think there is something to be said for specifically Murakami and Eldridge were so cheap relative to what the obvious upside outcomes could be. Not the most lucky. You got lucky. You got the cat feeder. That's usually a late night thing on FBT. Those guys had such obvious skills. Murakami, we're talking 70 grade raw power. Eldridge, probably the same. I think people looked too much at the flaws for both of them and said, well, there's no way a guy who swings and misses as much as Murakami can work. And it's like, well, it's unlikely. I agree, but there's always ranges of outcomes with everything. And when you have outlier skills, sometimes outlier results happen. And that's what we were seeing with Murakami. It's kind of frustrating he got hurt. Yeah. Just because, one, if he just stinks the rest of the way, it's like, well, was that natural, or was that he's not 100%? Did he get thrown off by the injury? And part of it's just like he was so much fun to watch, and it was so much fun to see him overcoming those flaws. So I hope he gets back soon and lives up to it, because that is one where there was no downside to drafting Munetaka Murakami. There was no downside to taking that late round flyer on Bryce Eldridge, because they cost almost nothing. I mean, Eldridge literally in most drafts was just going undrafted, but Murakami was like 200, 220 in a lot of drafts. And at that point, okay, let's say he can't hit major league pitching. Cool, you drop him. Like, people forget that you can just drop players who, like, you're probably going to drop your 200th pick anyway. So you might as well take the flyer on the guy who, if he can hit, could be a huge difference maker.
And that's something that I need to change in my own analysis. Something I've become very aware of recently is focusing in too much on the downside of players. And Nick Kurtz is the one I will use as the example.
Yeah.
No. Nick Kurtz, he had a 370 BABIP last year,
Mm-hmm.
and the contact rates stink, and he swings and misses a bunch. And I wasn't factoring in that he has like a 20% barrel rate, and he doesn't chase, and he actually has pretty decent plate discipline for a power hitter. And the ballpark is great, and the lineup around him is solid too. Like I focus in too much on the negatives, and with Murakami, it was the same thing. Now there was downside to drafting Nick Kurtz if he didn't work out and he was your second round pick. That's a hell of a lot different than Munetaka Murakami as your 17th round pick not working
Yeah.
out. But I think that was the thing with rookies this year. They were just so reasonably priced. Murakami, like McGonigal, Sal Stewart, JJ Weatherholt.
Even Connor Griffin never got,
Yeah,
he never got the Wyatt Langford treatment where he was like a
no,
top 50 pick. He was like he would settle around 75 to 100. And
yeah.
I'm interested to see what he looks like when he comes back, because it did look like he was starting to figure it out. And I still think we might be talking about him as a first round pick by September. I still think that upside's there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just we could have had all these guys on a team. That's the main part of the regret
Mm-hmm.
portion of this segment is these guys were just so cheap, and you could have taken a shot on pretty much all of them, or at least
Yeah.
half a dozen of them. And it might have felt crazy at the time to do, but we did a couple shows in the preseason. I'm sure you guys did too, just talking about there's so much talent in this rookie class. And again, going back to the Mizorowski point and Burns and Schlittler, these guys are never going to be this cheap again. So
Mm-hmm.
the worry now is that next year people will overreact, and Jesus Made and Leo DeVries and Seth Hernandez and those types of players will potentially be overvalued. But it's something you just got to be aware of in your analysis. But I think a lot of good points about those rookies. Chris, I want to just wrap it up with asking you about who do you regret drafting the most, and which player do you regret not drafting more of this season?
The player I regret drafting most. So there are some, like, I was really in on Cole Reagan's.
Oh yeah, me too.
That stinks.
Yeah,
Kyle Tucker, honestly.
me too.
I moved him to like 7th in my rankings before the season. I was so convinced he was going to just go like 100 plus runs, 100 plus RBI, 30-30. I thought he was going to be a monster in that lineup. Maybe he still gets there. You can still see the contours of that. Like you mentioned earlier, he's still on like a 85 pace in terms of runs and RBI. And so if he ends up with 2020, which is well within the realm of possibility, you're still going to be pretty happy with him, but it certainly hasn't gone the way I hoped. And then there was another one I wanted to mention. I don't know. I get lots of things wrong. There's no short. Oh, Ronald Acuna.
Okay.
I was, man. So that one, I don't even want to say I was wrong, because my thought process was he's going to run a lot more, and he was.
He was, yeah.
He was running in the Venezuelan Winter League. He was running in spring training. He was running in the World Baseball Classic, and he was running. He had 15 steals in 53 games. It's just, I don't know if he should. He is not, you look at the sprint speed, he's actually kind of pedestrian in sprint speed. He's like 63rd percentile or something like that, and has been for a couple of years, despite being a very good base stealer. But I do wonder if he's just been overexerting himself, and that's why we've seen the multiple hamstring injuries, and maybe it's time for him to focus on staying on the field, and can still be he was on a 15 to 20 steal pace last season. And if he hits like he did last year when he was on a 30 plus homer pace, and he was on pace for like 130 runs or some ungodly number. He was incredible.
Yeah.
And so he can still be a very good player, still a top 6 fantasy player, but it might be time for Ronald Acuna to run a bit less, and that's a bummer.
Yeah, I think, his body, there's been so many great athletes, and DeGrom is always the one that comes to mind for me.
Mm-hmm.
Their body is just not able to sustain what they're capable of, which
Yep.
it maybe sounds like an oxymoron or something like that, but there's just more talent in there than the body's even able to sustain, it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
40, 70, I mean, the year DeGrom threw 90 innings in half the season, and it was like a 45% strikeout to walk rate.
He was like the number 3 pitcher in fantasy, I think.
Yeah, even in half a season. Like, there are certain guys that are they burn too bright. They got too close to the sun. And it seems like that is what happens with Acuna when he runs as much as he does, and not even efficiently, I might add. 15 steals on 22 attempts. So it might be time for him to do the Mike Trout kind of thing, which, different stage of their career, but stop running, focus more on hitting, and maybe the hit tool improves a little bit. Maybe you can get the batting average back up over 300.
Look, I
And
want to see this guy make the Hall of Fame. And so if that means he
yeah,
only steals 15 bags per year the rest of the way, I'll take it if it means he can play 140 games, because he's played 48 games over the last 2 seasons since he came back from the torn ACL last year. 148 games, hitting 276, 28 homers, 24 steals, 105 runs, 64 RBI. If that's 20 steals, but everything else is the same, that's a borderline first-round player anyway.
yeah.
You'd be happy to have that on your team, but you want the 148 games, and we haven't gotten that since 2023.
I hope we get it again at some point. For me, my biggest regrets, I already kind of mentioned it, but Tucker, I have on a third of my teams or 31% of my teams or something. It's not
It's a
working
lot.
out. It could be a lot worse. Like, he could not have the 45 runs and 45 RBI, but
Yep.
has not been great, especially as one of my most rostered players. And the player I regret not drafting more, it just has to be that starting pitcher class that we talked about. Mizorowski, Burns, and Schlittler. They were so affordable, whether it was a snake draft or an auction. You could have had all of them. Maybe not all of them in a snake draft because they were kind of similar, but I think you guys get the point. Lots of regrets. Big regret is, another one is Reagan's, but I think that's probably, we're actually kind of aligned there. Tucker and Reagan's being
Yeah.
the big regrets, but I do not regret having Chris Towers on the show today. Always a lot of fun getting to catch up with you, my man. Let everybody know where they can keep up with your work, obviously at CBS, but anything to plug in the coming days and weeks?
Yeah, so cbssports.com/newsletters. The Fantasy Baseball Today newsletter is my primary focus, along with the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast. I've recently revamped the newsletter, try to make it a little more focused, but the goal there is we send it out every week, Monday through Friday, every single day. It's completely free. Just put in your email address, and my goal is to make it all you need to keep up with your fantasy team every day. All the news you need, biggest performances every day, putting it into context, waiver wire ads, all that stuff. So actually 6 times a week. We do one on Sunday. I always forget that. So 6 times a week, plus Fantasy Baseball Today podcast, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Make sure you guys are subscribing to the newsletter, to the podcast on YouTube, on the podcast feed. Subscribe everywhere, comment, like everywhere. Do us a solid here. We really appreciate it. But I hope you guys seriously took something away from this show. I know that just talking to Chris, I always learn a couple things, but also just evaluating your own process, I think, is very, very important. Individual analysis, not groupthink. Do your own rankings, do your own tiers. It really does pay off at the end of the day. But we will be back on Monday. It'll be Pizzapia and Welsh back for leading off. But for Chris Towers, I am Joe Orrico. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Pros Baseball Podcast.